On New Year's Eve, my wife asked me to meet her by the river, promising a surprise. I stood shivering in the heavy snow. But it wasn't until 2 in the morning that I finally received a video call from her. On the screen, she was nestled in the arms of her old flame, kissing him passionately. Meeting my resentful gaze, my wife reluctantly looked up and scoffed at me with contempt. I must have been blind to marry a good-for-nothing like you. If I'd gotten with Leo sooner, I'd be a rich man's wife by now. Her old flame sneered as well. Only a pathetic man like you can't hold on to a woman. Take a lesson from me, cars. Houses, I can give her whatever I want. The call ended. I set off the New Year's fireworks alone. Then, with hands red from the cold, I made another call. She didn't pass the test. Mom and Dad's inheritance. She'll never have it now. At 1 in the morning, I stood alone by the river, staring at the messy aftermath of the city's celebrations. I pulled out my phone and, for the countless time, tried to video call my wife, Jane Shaw. This time, she finally answered. On the other end, Jane's face was flushed. She was lying on a bed, biting her lip hard, as if in great pain. The rage in my heart was instantly extinguished, replaced by concern. What's wrong? Your face is so red. Are you feeling sick? Do you want me to take you to the... Before I could finish, she let out a soft moan. Then the camera shifted, and I saw the man behind her thrusting wildly. It was Jane's old flame, Leo Vance. Jane spoke then, her voice a mix of soft gasps and utter disdain. Sincere, sometimes I really wonder if there's something wrong with your brain. Isn't it obvious what's happening here? I murmured. Why? If you hadn't brainwashed me back then, why would I have ever ended up with a waste of space like you? If I had gotten with Leo sooner, I would have been set for life by now. Being with you was a complete waste of my time with that. She wrapped her arms around Leo's neck and kissed him deeply. The sight was blinding. The obscene sounds coming from my phone seemed to mock my naivety. My hand holding the phone turned white from the force of my grip. I closed my eyes and took a slow, deep breath. The cold air filled my lungs, and the emptiness in my mind was slowly replaced by a bitter sorrow. When I opened my eyes again, I nodded. I understand. If you feel like I've been holding you back, then let's get a divorce. Jane paused her movements, shot me a sidelong glance, and sneered. Sincere, you're nothing but my lapdog, and a dog without its master is just a stray. Be careful you don't starve to death on the streets. Her venomous words reignited my anger. In the eyes of the woman I loved so deeply, I was that worthless. Was my profound love nothing more than the pathetic fawning of a lapdog in her eyes? Seeing my silence, Jane patted Leo's chest, signaling for him to listen, then picked up the phone again. Look at those pathetic clothes you're wearing. Here, bark like a dog for me, and I'll send you $200. You can buy yourself a new dog. Skin. The icy wind bit at my face like sharp blades, cutting my skin. But the pain in my heart was far more unbearable. I clutched my coat pocket. Inside was a bank card. It was my New Year's gift for Jane. It was also the welcome gift my parents had left for the Windsor family's daughter-in-law. $500 million. Enough money for Jane to live a life of luxury for the rest of her days. But she had thrown it all away herself. Just then, Leo took the phone and panned it around the room. Finally, with a powerful thrust that made Jane cry out, he grinned smugly. See this? This is the presidential suite of a 5-star hotel. And look at this bag, Hermes. Ever heard of it? Only a pathetic man like you can't hold on to a woman. A man like me can give her houses, cars, whatever I want. How can you possibly compare? Right, baby? Jane cooed and looked up, and the two kissed again. The person I once loved to my very bones now only filled me with disgust. She had no idea that the so-called presidential suite was just one of my family's more modest properties. As for that Hermes bag, it was an old, outdated model that even my grandmother wouldn't bother with. But it didn't matter anymore. I looked into the camera and spoke in a low voice. Let's cut the crap. We'll get the paperwork done tomorrow. Jane frowned, a flicker of surprise in her eyes. Leo, however, burst out laughing, his eyes full of contempt. This toy boy is all talk. What, is 200 not enough? How about I transfer you a few hundred more if you get on your knees, kowtow to me, and apologize to my little snowflake?" The surprise in Jane's eyes vanished. She glanced back at the man behind her, then at me, shivering in the wind and snow. Disgust crept into her features. "Sincere, can you even call yourself a man?" With that, she turned and threw her arms around Leo. "Baby, let's continue." The call disconnected. I looked up as snowflakes drifted onto my face, melting into icy water that trickled down my cheeks. I let out a long breath. I watched the white mist rise until it disappeared completely. After a long while, I used my freezing red hands to make a call. "Grandma, I believe you now. I should never have doubted your judgment." "Jane, she didn't pass the test. Mom and Dad's inheritance will never be hers." Receiving my call, my grandmother didn't seem surprised. She just sighed heavily. "My dear boy, you've suffered all these years. It's for the best to be rid of a woman like that. Don't you worry. As soon as you're divorced, Grandma will contact the Kingsley family." "You remember the girl from your childhood betrothal? That little girl adores you, you know." I mumbled a quiet yes. After hanging up, I took out the fireworks I had bought earlier. I lit the fuse. As the fireworks shot into the sky, for some reason a wave of pathetic irony washed over me. I had shivered in the cold all night for a so-called surprise. Meanwhile, the woman I loved was shamelessly sleeping with another man for money. The cruel joke was, money was the one thing I had in abundance. It turns out that deep affection is worthless. That saying was absolutely right. I sat alone by the river until the morning sun began to rise on the horizon. Only then did I get to my feet. Before leaving, I had to go back to the apartment. Even if my belongings weren't worth much, I had worked hard to earn the money to buy them. There was no reason to just abandon them. I took a cab to the apartment complex. Just as I was taking out my key to open the door, I heard faint voices from the hallway. "Darling, I'm getting married this weekend, at the Imperial Grand Hotel. He's a real heir, you know." Sincere? That broke loser? Just thinking about him makes me angry. Back then, his parents' funeral was so extravagant I thought I could get a piece of the inheritance. But I waited all this time, and I got nothing. I froze. It was Jane's voice. She seemed to be on the phone with someone. Her words brought back memories. I had met Jane after an accident. A car crash had left me severely injured. Thankfully, Jane appeared, took me to the hospital, and cared for me day and night, ensuring I had no lasting injuries. After I was discharged, I confessed my feelings for her. Not long after, my parents died in an accident. Devastated, I refused to leave the house. Jane, who was just my girlfriend at the time, voluntarily held a vigil for me, kneeling in front of my parents' memorial altar for 3 days and 3 nights. I was deeply moved. I had planned to propose to her with my full identity as the Windsor heir as soon as the funeral was over. But my grandmother stopped me. "You need to understand your position now. You are not just the Windsor heir, you are the future head of the Windsor family. Grandma won't oppose you being with her, but she must pass a probationary period. During this time, you will live as an ordinary person." My grandmother had always believed in marrying within one's social class. She was always wary of Jane, who had appeared so suddenly in my life. Now it seemed her concerns were justified. As moving as Jane's actions had been back then, the woman she was today was no longer worth me risking everything for. I ignored the grating laughter from the hallway and simply opened the door, stepping inside. The small room that once felt so warm to me now, stripped of the filter of love, seemed utterly dilapidated. The musty smell that hit me was almost suffocating. Even my family's maids wouldn't deign to live in a room like this. Looking at the photo of us on the wall, I couldn't help but laugh at myself. Back when Jane and I got our marriage license, I had wanted to take money from my family to have a proper wedding. But Jane had refused. She said she wanted to wait until I had made a name for myself so I could marry her in a grand and glorious fashion. I never expected that wait to last so many years. Just then, the door was thrown open, pulling me from my memories. Jane was back. Our eyes met. A flash of surprise and embarrassment crossed her face, but it quickly faded, replaced by a cold sneer. Then, speaking into her phone, her voice dripping with disgust, she said, "You have no idea." At the funeral for Sincere's deadbeat parents, I almost threw up in the coffin from pure disgust. Why should I have to kowtow to a couple of stinking corpses? And that old crone and his family daring to give me conditions. She should take a look at her family's pathetic state. Who are they to tell me what to do? I stared at her coldly. Jane had no idea that yesterday was the final day of the probationary period my grandmother had set for her. Besides the bank card, my grandmother had also prepared a dowry worth over $100 million. My uncles had arranged a welcome banquet. I had even prepared to transfer a portion of my company's shares to her. If only she had shown up on time. If only she could have endured for one more day, she would have gained the Windsor family's approval. She would have become the youngest female CEO in Seacliff City. But alas, she couldn't resist the temptation of money. She had forgotten that I have always been one to love and hate fiercely. Even if I had willingly jumped into the abyss for her, I was still the heir of the Windsor family. If I wanted to, I could have everything back in an instant. And if I wanted to, I could ensure that she and her old flame would never be able to get back on their feet for the rest of their lives. Speak of the devil. Leo Vance walked into the room with his hands behind his back as if taking a leisurely stroll. He first scanned the room with an arrogant, disdainful gaze. Finally, his eyes settled on me, filled with contempt. "Sincere, and you call yourself a man? It's not really your fault, though. Blame your useless parents. These few years with Jane must have been the most comfortable time of your life, right? At least you had food, drink, and a place to sleep." I ignored him. Finding no amusement, he went inside and began obsequiously helping Jane pack her things. I watched the two of them bustle about with cold eyes. Finally, Jane slapped the prepared divorce agreement down on the table in front of me. "You asked for this. Sign it quickly. I have to go with Leo to the Hot Springs Resort." "Do you even know what a hot springs resort is, you country bumpkin?" I ignored her incessant chatter, picked up the pen, and with a flourish of my hand quickly signed my name. Seeing this, Jane's eyes flashed with surprise and a faint hint of disappointment. Her lips twitched slightly, then, as if in a pique, she grabbed Leo's arm, pressing most of her body against him. Leo grinned, and right in front of me slid his hand into Jane's low-cut top, squeezing forcefully. The two of them walked towards the door, clinging to each other. "Wait a minute," I said in a low voice. Jane immediately turned, a malicious smile on her face, a look of understanding in her eyes. She lifted her chin haughtily, her tone filled with pity. "Regretting it now? Want to beg me to stay? Fine. Seeing as you can't bear to part with me, I'll let you stay in this apartment for now. I won't ask for rent, but you have to prepare meals for me and Leo every day, wash Leo's clothes, and also give me back the bracelet." I cut her off coldly. Jane froze. Beside her, Leo scoffed. "A bracelet? You treat it like some kind of treasure." With that, he grabbed Jane's wrist, pulled the gold bracelet off, and tossed it onto the floor. The surface of the gold bracelet was already showing signs of rust, clearly a cheap gold-plated piece of copper. I bent down, picked up the bracelet, wiped it carefully with a tissue, and then gently placed it in my breast pocket. This was a memento from my mother. During the accident, she could have escaped. But seeing my father, lifeless in the driver's seat, she suddenly took off this bracelet and quietly sat back down in the car. Before that, I thought dying for love was just something out of old songs and stories. My grandmother later gave me the bracelet. She told me my father had crafted it for my mother himself. Because he had no money, he could only plate it with a thin layer of gold. Though it wasn't valuable, it was the most precious gift in my heart. That's why I gave it to Jane. But now she was no longer worthy. Seeing my actions, Jane's eyes filled with dissatisfaction. "Sincere, are you trying to put on a melodrama for me? It's a piece of gold-plated junk, and you're treating it like a treasure. What? Are you trying to make me feel sorry for you?" As she spoke, Jane strode over to me, grabbed my arm, and stared intently at my face. She seemed to be searching for any trace of reluctance or longing. Unfortunately for her, my face was a mask of calm. She was about to say more, but I had run out of patience. "Jane, I've already agreed to the divorce as you wished. What more is there to say?" Jane's expression froze. She seemed to think of something and shook her head with a cold laugh. "Tisk, tisk, tisk. I didn't realize, sincere. You're quite the actor for the sake of all the years you served me. If you kneel and beg me right now, I might just grant you the charity of hugging me one last time." Even now, she still thought I couldn't live without her, financially or emotionally. In her mind, at this very moment, I should be falling to my knees without a second thought, clutching her legs and sobbing without any dignity, begging her not to leave. But unfortunately for her, I remained perfectly calm. The atmosphere grew tense. Anger slowly crept onto Jane's face. She shrieked and reached to snatch the bracelet from my pocket. Without a moment's hesitation, I raised my hand and slapped her, sending her stumbling back 2 steps. You dare?" Jane clutched her face, her eyes bloodshot. "Leo, hold this bastard down for me." Leo lunged forward with a savage grin, but I didn't hold back. In the middle of the struggle, Jane suddenly rushed in. Catching me off guard, she snatched the bracelet from my pocket, threw it to the ground, and began stomping on it relentlessly. "Stop," I roared, landing a sharp elbow strike that sent Leo sprawling to the floor. I then lunged to retrieve the bracelet, but after such abuse it was completely misshapen, with a crack running through its center. A sharp pain pierced my heart. I picked up the bracelet and stared daggers at Jane. Jane, somewhat frightened, quickly backed away to the door and shouted at me. "It's just a broken bracelet. Don't even think about trying to extort me. Only a good-for-nothing like you would treasure such trash. I'm so glad I got out when I did. With you, I probably would have been stuck in poverty until the day I died after they left," my family's driver called. "Young master, the matriarch has been waiting for you to come home since this morning. Should I?" I took a deep breath. My grandmother's health had been declining over the years. I couldn't let her worry about my affairs any longer. Looking at the mangled bracelet in my hand, Jane's heartless face flashed through my mind again. She had always believed she got her job, climbed the ladder from intern to director, and even easily secured investment for her little startup all through her own efforts. But in reality, her job, her everything, it was all because of my support behind the scenes. I wanted her to become exceptional, to help me manage the Windsor Group in the future. But in the end, this was what I got in return. I took out my phone and first called the company's vice president. "It's me. Jane and I are divorced. I want a thorough investigation of her work records over the years. Don't miss a single thing. I want her to suffer." After hanging up, I sent a message to the investor. "Stop all funding for Jane Shaw's projects and demand repayment of all previous investments." After doing all this, I went downstairs. Seeing the stretched Lincoln, so out of place in this neighborhood, the turmoil in my heart finally began to settle. From this day forward, I will make everyone who betrayed me wish they were dead. When I arrived at the Windsor family mansion, the first thing I saw was my grandmother waiting at the entrance. I got out of the car and immediately went to her. Grandma held my hand, her eyes welling with tears as she looked me up and down. "My dear grandson, how did you become so worn out? You've suffered so much out there all these years." I smiled and patted her hand. "Don't worry, Grandma. I'm fine." But Grandma just kept shaking her head and sighing. "If I had known it would come to this, I should have been firmer back then and forced you to break up with that woman. To this, I could only remain silent. Who could have guessed that Jane could fake love so convincingly?" To welcome me home, Grandma had specifically ordered a table full of my favorite dishes. At the dinner table, she served me food and said, "Sincere, my boy, that girl from the Kingsley family, Victoria Kingsley, she came by a few days ago. The Kingsleys heard you were coming back and even mentioned the marriage agreement you two had. That Victoria girl has grown up to be so beautiful. When you have time, you should ask her out." Hearing the familiar name, I couldn't help but feel a little dazed. A long-buried memory was awakened. The snot-nosed little girl who used to follow me around yelling "Sincere" all day, had she really grown into such an elegant young woman? But soon, I shook my head bitterly. I'm a divorced man now. I shouldn't ruin a good girl's life. Grandma sighed but didn't press the matter. After dinner, I took a wonderful bath and lay down on the soft mattress, falling asleep almost instantly. 3 days passed before I finally remembered to check my phone. The company's vice president had sent a message. I've already had Jane Shaw terminated. The company is also proceeding with a lawsuit. There was a problem with the investor. Jane refuses to refund the money and is demanding to meet the investor in person. I have already declined on your behalf. The last message was from Victoria Kingsley. Our last chat was right after my parents had passed away. She had offered me a few words of comfort. Her message was simple but very direct. When are we getting our marriage license? I hesitated for a long time, and in the end, I didn't reply. Instead, I called the investor. Since she wants to meet, let's arrange it. No problem, Mr. Windsor. The meeting place the investor arranged was at a high-end private club. Just as I arrived at the entrance, before I could go in, I heard Jane's voice from behind me. Sincere, what are you doing here? She strode towards me. She looked me up and down, then seemed to have a realization. Tisk, tisk. Can't take it after just a few days apart? You're stalking me all the way here? But her smile quickly froze on her face. My bespoke suit, my polished leather shoes, and the gold watch on my wrist all seemed to confuse her. She couldn't understand how I seemed like a completely different person after just a few days. But soon, a look of disdain flashed in her eyes. I never would have guessed Sincere. Now that I'm gone, have you stooped to selling your body? How much for a night? Let's hear it. It seemed she had mistaken me for a gigolo. Before I could speak, the hostesses at the club entrance noticed me. After exchanging glances, they quickly formed 2 lines. Good evening, Mr. Windsor. Jane was stunned for a moment but didn't think much of it. Noticing my driver, Lewis, who had just parked the car behind me, her eyes lit up. She hurried forward, grabbed Lewis's hand, her voice full of sycophantic charm. Mr. Windsor, I'm begging you, please don't pull the funding. If you agree, I'll do anything you want. As she spoke, she deliberately pulled down the collar of her low-cut dress. Lewis frowned, looked up at me, and cast a pleading glance for help. I was curious about Jane's behavior myself. Why would she mistake Lewis for the investor? Soon, a sentence from Jane gave me the answer. The last time you came to deliver the check, I made sure to remember your license plate. The receptionist said your surname was Windsor, Jane said smugly. Mr. Windsor, I hold you in the highest regard, she chattered on, completely oblivious to Lewis's strange expression. She was so foolish she didn't even know the basics. No truly wealthy person drives themselves. I gave Lewis a look, signaling him to play along. Lewis managed to suppress his laughter. Jane grabbed his arm and started to pull him into the club. This way, Mr. Windsor. I've booked a private room. We can talk about the project. I followed behind them at a leisurely pace. Upon entering the private room, Jane turned and saw me, and her face immediately fell. Waiter, what are you standing there for? Hurry up and pour the guest a drink. The club manager, who had just entered, saw the scene and froze in terror. He quickly stepped in front of me. This club was also one of my family's properties. As my subordinate, how could he dare let me pour drinks for someone else? I'm sorry, Ms. Shaw, but Mr. Windsor, he's not available. Why don't I do it? As an apology to you esteemed bosses. At my signal, the manager didn't reveal my identity, just cleverly smoothed things over. But Jane was relentless. She snatched the wine glass from the manager's hand. What damn, Mr. Windsor, what? Are you two playing some kind of role-playing game? At the end of the day, he's just a worthless gigolo. You're pouring this wine today whether you like it or not, otherwise I'll make sure you can't work in this city ever again. The smile on the manager's face vanished instantly, and his tone turned cold. I call you Miss Shaw, and you really think you're someone special. If it weren't for Mr. Windsor's permission, you wouldn't even have the chance to set foot in here. Security, get this crazy woman out of here. I picked up a wine glass and waved my hand at the manager. I came here today specifically to cause her trouble. If she left so early, wouldn't my performance be for nothing? Since you're so eager for me to pour you a drink, it would be rude to refuse. I poured a full glass of red wine. But before I could make a move, a small, soft hand grabbed my wrist, applying gentle pressure. I cooperated, tilting the glass up. The next second, the entire glass of red wine drenched Jane, leaving her looking like a drowned rat. Her carefully applied makeup was ruined, and wine dripped from her hair all the way down to her pants. I turned my head. A noble and aloof woman was standing behind me. Our eyes met. The icy mountain on her face melted, and she gave me a gentle smile. Looking at her familiar features, I was momentarily stunned. "Ah, who are you?" Jane shrieked in fury, lunging at the woman with her claws out. "I'm his fiancée." Victoria Kingsley stood her ground, not flinching in the slightest. Jane rushed forward, faltered, and slowly lowered her hands. It wasn't just the burly bodyguards behind Victoria that scared her, but also the innate noble aura Victoria possessed. In comparison, Jane, with her neck shrunk down, looked no different from the working girls in the club. I couldn't help but sigh. I must have been truly blind back then to fall for such a woman. Feeling that she had lost face, Jane couldn't resist a snide remark. "Fiancé? More like some lonely rich man's mistress. Someone like you can only pick up the trash I throw away before she could finish." Victoria's elegant brows shot up. She stepped forward and slapped Jane across the face. Jane didn't even have time to react before she was sent sprawling to the floor. "You dare hit me?" Jane shrieked and scrambled to her feet, but two bodyguards stepped forward and subdued her in an instant. Victoria walked up and delivered several more sharp slaps. Listening to the crisp smack, 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 I felt nothing but a sense of profound satisfaction. Wiping her hands, Victoria nodded to the two bodyguards, then returned to my side, her tone becoming gentle. "Let's go. The air in a room with this kind of trash is disgusting." Then, without another word, she took my arm. As we were leaving the room, I heard the manager speak to Jane in a tone of extreme pity. "You've managed to offend the two biggest families in Seacliff City in one go. Tisk, tisk, good luck." After I got back in the car, Victoria stood beside it. Her usually cool face was now flickering with a look of pitiful grievance. "Why didn't you reply to my message? When are we getting our marriage license?" I froze for a moment, only then remembering the unanswered message. Looking into her earnest eyes, I deliberately teased her. "Before getting married, shouldn't we consider it carefully?" Victoria's brows furrowed slightly. As if remembering something, she took a file out of her bag. "If you still have any feelings for that woman, I think you need a serious wake-up call." I took the file from her, puzzled. The moment I opened it, my pupils contracted. My accidental meeting with Jane was also a meticulously planned trap. The car crash had been orchestrated by Jane. She and the driver were a team. They specifically targeted people who looked distinguished or were covered in luxury brands. There had been many victims before me. Seeing my well-dressed appearance, Jane had set her sights on me. Coupled with the fact that many influential figures attended my parents' lavish and extravagant funeral, she became even more convinced that I was a rich heir. To get her hands on my family's inheritance, she put on the persona of a deeply devoted wife, tricked me into getting a marriage certificate, and then patiently stayed by my side. It wasn't until she noticed that after the funeral, all my clothes were replaced with cheap street stall items, and I was content eating plain bread and pickles every day, that she realized I bore no resemblance to the image of a wealthy young master she had in her mind. Just as this happened, her old flame returned from abroad. So she decisively gave up on me. Reading this, I couldn't help but feel a chill. Thank God I had pulled back in time and listened to my grandmother's advice, not giving her everything. Otherwise, the situation would likely have been even more out of control. Seeing that I showed no signs of sadness, Victoria's tense body visibly relaxed. "I don't think there's anything to consider. I like you, and you said you liked me when we were kids, so we're perfect for each other." Looking at her earnest gaze, I couldn't help but shake my head and chuckle. Our families had been friends for generations. When we were children, our parents would joke about arranging a childhood betrothal for us. I never thought that the young Victoria would take their casual words to heart. She used to follow me around every day like a little shadow. But for me, my feelings for her were more like those for a little sister next door. Even later, during adolescence, when feelings of first love bloomed, I never had any improper thoughts about her. I even completely cut off contact with her because Jane got jealous. But now I realized, after the person I loved so deeply betrayed me, she was still standing there, waiting for me, just like always. I still remember the day Jane and I got our marriage license. I saw Victoria hiding in the distance. Seeing the red marriage certificate in our hands, she stumbled back and fled in distress. I thought that was our last encounter. I never imagined she would just stand there, foolishly waiting for me. Thinking of this, I took out my wallet. "Did you bring your ID?" After leaving the city hall, Victoria and I, by a silent mutual understanding, went back to her place. The moment we walked in the door, Victoria threw herself into my arms. "You know, Sincere, I've been waiting for this day for so long." She looked up, stood on her toes, and kissed my lips. I was stunned for a moment, then responded with passion. Moonlight streamed through the window, illuminating the romantic scene in the room. Victoria, shedding her usual cold demeanor, pushed me onto the bed, straddled my legs, and burned with a fiery passion. After a round of pleasure, I tiredly stroked the soft, delicate body beside me. The little girl from long ago had truly grown up. When I opened my eyes again, it was the next morning. I then realized that the room's decor and furnishings all looked remarkably familiar and comforting. Even the position of the figurines on the desk was exactly the same. But I knew very well this was not my bedroom, but Victoria's house. I turned my head to look at the delicate woman in my arms. There were still faint tear stains on her face, making her look pitiably lovely. I gently pinched her nose, waited for her to open her eyes, and then asked softly, "Have you been to my house in secret?" Victoria was taken aback for a moment, then quickly understood what I was talking about, her face turning a slight shade of red. "I just wanted to see things that reminded me of you." I shook my head with a light laugh and picked up my phone, just about to check the time. Suddenly, an incoming call popped up on the screen. Without much thought, I answered it. The next second, Jane's furious voice came through. "Sincere, what is the meaning of this? It's bad enough you deceived me for all these years, but now you want to ruin me?" I sneered. "When did I ever deceive you? We're divorced. Can you please stop harassing me?" Jane raised her voice. "You're still playing dumb, aren't you? I know everything. You're the heir of the Windsor family. You spent all those years with a poor girl like me. You must have had some ulterior motive." Before I could speak, she seemed to understand something, her tone becoming hysterical. "I know you know the truth about what happened back then, don't you? I admit it. I hired someone to hit you with a car back then. But you made me lose my job. My project fell through. You've gotten your revenge, haven't you? You also humiliated me in front of so many people yesterday. Tell me, how are you going to compensate me?" She had confessed without any prompting. In that moment, I realized just how stupid and vicious she was. Over the years, with my help, Jane had received the full support and mentorship of senior colleagues at her company. I had even spared no expense to secure an extremely profitable project for her. I had even invested the living expenses my grandmother privately gave me into her ventures. And me, I was always wearing cheap clothes from street vendors. I was willing to live a poor life for her because I truly loved her. But she refused to believe it. She thought the only reason I was with her was to get revenge. Just as I was about to retort, a fragrant, soft body snuggled into my arms. She took my hand and gently placed it on her ample chest. The astonishing softness in my palm made my mind wander, and I couldn't help but knead and play with it. Victoria's cheeks flushed, her body trembling slightly as she let out a soft moan. "Sincere? What are you doing? Why is there a woman's voice with you?" Jane's screams were laced with fury and thick jealousy. Before I could speak, Victoria had already climbed on top of me, sitting on my waist again. Then she leaned down, her red lips lightly pecking mine. "I'm his wife." With that, she took the phone from my hand and tossed it aside. As her shapely hips gently settled down, A jolt of electricity shot from the soles of my feet to the top of my head. Forgetting that the call was still connected, I flipped her over, pinning her beneath me. "You little devil, you're playing with fire." An hour later, I was lying in bed with Victoria, dreaming about our wedding. "We'll book the entire coastline. I want the whole city to witness our wedding." Victoria looked at me intently, her eyes slowly turning red. Her deep eyes were filled with a torrent of emotions I couldn't comprehend. A single tear slid from the corner of her eye. I grew a little nervous. "What's wrong? You don't like extravagant weddings?" Before she could finish, she suddenly threw herself into my arms, her voice filled with a sense of grievance. "Sincere, I'm so happy. I'm really, really happy. Even now, I still feel like I'm dreaming. Before, every time I dreamed of you, you would disappear the moment I nodded. When I woke up, I was all alone again." She looked up, her gaze burning. "Sincere, no matter what happens, please don't ever leave me again, okay? I don't care if the wedding is luxurious. I only care if the person standing there is you." Looking at the deep love in her eyes, I couldn't hold back any longer and pulled her into a tight embrace. I forgot who initiated it. I only knew that this morning felt exceptionally long. In the throes of passion, she wrapped her arms around my neck, constantly whispering sweet nothings in my ear. Urged on by both our families, the wedding day arrived quickly. On the eve of the ceremony, I heard news of Jane again. After her deeds were exposed, her so-called old flame, Leo Vance, had decisively abandoned her. To pay off her debts, Jane was borrowing money from everyone, even turning to my friends. They all knew what had happened, so they came to me for my opinion. A plan formed in my mind: lend her as much as she wants, but don't call it a loan, call it an investment. Write the highest possible interest rate into the contract, and as for the principal, put it on my tab. The news got out, and a few days later Jane called me, her voice full of triumph. "You didn't expect this, did you, Sincere? You thought you could ruin me, right? All I had to do was ask, and I easily secured a $10 million investment. Just you wait. When I make my comeback, I will make you and your entire Windsor family pay for old time's sake. If you get on your knees and beg me right now, I'll give you a chance to get back together with me." Her condescending attitude made it seem as though marrying her was some great honor. Unfortunately, the foolish woman had no idea that I was her benefactor. A few words of flattery from my friends, and she truly believed she was destined for greatness. I wonder if she'll still be smiling when her company goes bankrupt and she's drowning in debt. On the wedding day, I booked the entire coastline. Halfway through the ceremony, I heard a commotion from the reception area. "I am the future richest woman in the capital and the love of the Windsor heir's life. Why can't I go in?" A bodyguard stood in front of her, expressionless. "Sorry, no invitation, no entry." In just 1 month, Jane had fallen to this state. She was wearing an ill-fitting gown, her face caked with cheap makeup. A few shady-looking men trailed behind her. The guests at the entrance shook their heads in disapproval. Is this woman crazy? The love of Mr. Windsor's life? She should take a look at herself. The bodyguard was not polite, directly dragging her out like a dead fish and tossing her aside. "What are you looking at?" Victoria looked over curiously. I gently blocked her view. "Don't look. It's just something dirty." The wedding continued. I took out the velvet box I had prepared. 2 exquisitely crafted diamond rings sparkled in the sunlight. "Victoria, will you marry me?" Victoria smiled beautifully but didn't speak. Instead, she took out a small box wrapped in red cloth from her purse. Inside was the gold bracelet my mother had left me. The dents from being stepped on had been repaired. My heart stirred. Looking at the blush on her earlobes, I stepped forward, and amidst the cheers of the crowd, I gently kissed her lips. "Victoria, I love you. Sincere, I love you too. The rest of our lives begins now." The end.